Members of Council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises me that it is now 7 o'clock. I will call this council meeting to order, and I would ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection on our national anthem. Is there any member of council with a disclosure this evening? Councillor Best?
Yes, item 2 of the items for consideration. As I've noted to the clerk, I am employed by the real estate company that was involved in the purchase of the property.
Thank you very much. Are there any further disclosures? If not, Mr. Clerk, I know that there are some amendments and agenda announcements.
Yes, Your Worship. Excuse me. There's an additional registered delegations on technical report PD 2019, which is Howland Green. Under Section 9, items for consideration, Item 8, the motion to waive the rules of procedure bylaw has been withdrawn. And Item 9, notice of motion on action has been moved into Section 10, introduction of notice of motion. For Council, consider a motion to refer the item back to staff for a public report at May 27th Council meeting.
I thank you very much for that, Mr. Clerk. Members of Council, are there any questions of clarification of the clerk on any of those amendments or announcements that he just made? Being none, we will proceed. Should make mention that we will be going into committee of the whole, and Councillor Di Lorenzo, he's made us aware that he's on his way and he should be here in a few moments. Just in case anybody knows, there may be just a brief lull in the proceedings, and that's the reason why. But just in case it's very prolonged, I know Councillor Hamid is next in line, so he would be assuming the chair at that point in time. So hopefully Councillor Di Lorenzo will be here very shortly. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ellie. And be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 10 be approved. Or any one of those items that any member of council wished pulled out and dealt with separately? Being none, and again, could be a very quick meeting here on waiting for Councillor Di Lorenzo. So, Councillor Hamid, you better be prepared. All in favor of that motion? Let's see, that's carried. Just to drag it out. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. On the serious side, just before I adjourn the council meeting for Councillor Hamid, and it'll only take a couple minutes to turn things around, but I just want to thank a number of my colleagues, and more particularly the citizens of Milton. There was well over 1,000 individuals that showed up on Saturday for the Good Neighbors Day to clean up our community with some of the stuff that's thrown around after the winter months. So I just want to thank my colleagues that showed up for that, but more particularly over 1,000 individuals that really cleaned up the community. I haven't heard, Mr. Cripps, how much we might have picked up, and I know Public Works picked up a lot of that garbage on the same day along the roads and streets. So I'm not sure if you have any information. I know it's early on. Mr. Cripps?
Your Worship, at this time, I've asked for that information, but we haven't got a total at this point. So when we have that number, we'll make sure Council is made aware of it.
I thank you very much, and again, just a great big thank you that goes out to those individuals that did assist. So with that, Mr. Clerk, timing Councillor Di Lorenzo is just perfect, so you better not sit down. Better make your way up here. Members of Council, ladies and gentlemen, the Council meeting is now adjourned. Councillor Di Lorenzo will assume the chair for Committee of the Whole. Councillor Di Lorenzo, just give us a couple of minutes to get things turned around. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
So good evening, everyone. On May 6th, calling the public meeting portion. So this is now a public meeting portion of our agenda. Council will not make a final decision on any application tonight. Anyone who would like to be informed when the final report will be going to Council, or anyone who wishes to speak but is not a registered delegate, can please fill out the register located just inside the Council chamber doors. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act for revisions to proposed plan of subdivision zoning bylaw amendment applications by Madam E. Brownridge Limited, Martin East. The staff report is PD 02219. If there is anyone other than a representative of the applicant in the audience who would like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand. You will be given an opportunity to speak, and registered delegates will be given the opportunity to speak first. I see one person there. So it's my understanding we do have some registered delegates listed for tonight. So the purpose of this public meeting is to receive input on the proposed development application so that staff is aware of the issues raised by the public when completing the evaluation of this proposal. Staff will be taking detailed notes, however, will not be responding to questions except to provide clarification regarding the process or points of fact. Staff will respond to any issues raised through a future technical report with recommendations. I now call on the applicant or the representative if they wish to speak to the matter, if they're in attendance.
Good evening, members of council, members of the public, and town staff. I do have a quick presentation prepared this evening to summarize the proposed changes from the draft approved subdivision plan.
So could you also state your name and who you're representing?
Constance Rattel from Corsiac Urban Planning, and I'm here on behalf of Madam E. Brown Ridge Limited.
Thank you.
Okay, before I get into the presentation, we did have a previous public meeting in September of 2018, and the changes I'm about to present were proposed to address the concerns of the adjacent landowner regarding the water balance needs of the adjacent agricultural lands. The subject property, the Martin East property, is located between Britannia and Louis St. Laurent, east of 16 Mile Creek and adjacent to Thompson Road. It is surrounded by future development lands to the north, the west, and to the southwest as well. And there's adjacent agricultural property to the east of the southern portion of the property. This colored plan is a prettier version of the draft approved plan dated October 15th, 2018. It was draft approved by the town November 7th, 2018. The plan included single detached lots, townhouse blocks as well as back-to-back townhouses, and several future medium density blocks along Whitlock Avenue. And in the red, there is a node block in the northeast corner. The plan also proposed a neighborhood park central to the plan, as well as an adjacent elementary school, and as you can see, also a portion of an elementary school straddling the property line to the north. There are 4 stormwater management ponds proposed, 2 of which are along Thompson Road. Since then, the plan has been revised, and the key changes occur on the east side of the property, just west of Thompson Road. This is a side-by-side representation of the key changes to those 2 ponds on Thompson Road. As you can see, the north pond has been expanded and the south pond reduced. The north pond now outlets solely to the agricultural property to the east rather than outletting down to the south pond. These changes were made to capture further drainage area to meet an increase in the water balance requirements for that property to the east. The collector road network there is unchanged from the draft approved plan. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment has not been approved. I'm just showing this comparison from the previous public meeting report to show that the proposed zoning is being updated in accordance with the draft plan changes, as well just on the east side of that plan. So those open space zones have been resized and reshaped according to the stormwater pond changes, and the subsequent changes to the residential areas reflect the changes to that area of the plan as well. So just in summary, the plan continues to conform to planning policies, and it incorporates the recommendations of the updated stormwater management strategy that was developed to address the riparian rights of the adjacent agricultural property. And that's all. Thank you very much.
If you could wait, I think there's some questions from council, please. I think Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Just one question. I don't see anywhere in the report whether you have sufficient water and wastewater allocation to build this area. Do you or don't you? I just want to highlight, because that's a concern of council and at present, if we are going to approve this report, could it be built or not?
I believe there is servicing allocation for this property. I'm not sure to what extent. I believe it might be phased as well, but I'm sure I do have representatives from the applicant as well with me this evening, or perhaps the town can clarify.
Okay, thank you. Clarify later. Thank you.
I see Commissioner Kubins put her hand up. Maybe she has some clarifications to that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the developer, Mattamy Homes, holds a considerable amount of reserved allocation in Milton, and there is a flexibility under the regional allocation agreements to transfer allocation among their lands within Milton. So there is sufficient allocation held by Mattamy to allow this to be registered.
Yeah, thank you for that information.
Thank you. If I see no other questions from council, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So I will now open the floor to the public. It is a public meeting, so we don't have registered delegates, but anyone in the public can speak. Is there anybody who has anything they wish to add or speak? I see one gentleman there. If you could please come up, and when speaking, please state your name and address for the record clearly. Thank you, sir.
My name's Dave McCann. I live at 1487 Thompson Road, and I'm the farmer, landowner right across the road from Mattamy Development. First, I'd just like to thank you for having me here and allowing me to speak tonight. I have two main points to speak about. First of all, I was told that the intersection that's going on Thompson Road couldn't be readjusted because all these properties were locked in, so this has seemed to change now. So I'd just like to put forward that the proposed new intersection is on a waterway, okay, and that I believe it will not serve the community due to its location. It would better serve the community north of the waterway. Now, of its proposed location, it is in the southerly exit of the subdivision where the least amount of housing is there. Also, due to changing weather conditions, having an intersection on a waterway may have serious safety implications. Also, with the recent rainfall and flooding in this location, in conjunction with the excavation that has been going on, there has been very large flooding and velocities of water coming through there as it is now. Secondly, with the stormwater ponds, is all the information that I have received is based on information of a 100-year history. And basically they're following minimum standards. And according to experts, weather patterns are changing and weather disasters are inevitable. We just need to look around us and see major flooding issues everywhere. Even in town, we see major renovations for floodplains. I don't know whether it's prudent to reduce these ponds when 100-year floods are now happening on a more frequent basis. I believe we should be more proactive with this opportunity. We have the opportunity now to make these ponds bigger and serve us better. If we don't need these, it's always easier to fill in a pond than it is to tear down a house. So I think it's prudent for us to be proactive to avoid any future problems with this flooding that may come along. So I also think that we need to put forward some acceptable standards. What is going to be acceptable water flow onto my property? Some sort of numbers need to be adjusted so that I'm not just calling or somebody's calling saying, hey, you know, this is what I see, this is what I think. I would rather call up and if there's something wrong and say the level's supposed to be at this standard and we've exceeded it or we haven't reached it or something. I also think it would be a prudent idea to allow during drier months that we have a valve or some way of diverting this water so that when the floods do come back, I could probably accept some of this water during drought periods to fill up my ponds, to water my cattle, to use up this water to make more availability in these ponds also. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any questions from council, so thank you for coming today. I saw staff members were taking notes of your concerns.
Thank you.
Are there any more members of the public wishing to speak? For a second time, are there any people in the audience who would like to come forward and speak on this matter? And for a final time. As there are no more speakers, I will now read out the staff recommendation. Wait, sorry, are there any, yeah. Be it resolved that Planning and Development Report PD 02219 be received for information. Are there any questions or comments from council? Seeing none, I will now hold the vote. All those in favor of the resolution, please raise your hand. I see none opposed. Everyone's for. The motion carries. Questions about the report or for information on the appeal process should be directed to planning staff. I now declare the public meeting portion closed. Okay, moving on to our agenda. Under presentations and delegations, there's staff report ES 01119. I see there's a presentation by the GTAA. Is there someone in the audience doing that presentation? Thank you. And if you please also state your name and who you're representing. I believe it's GTAA.
Thank you. Good evening, members of Milton Town Council and members of the public. My name is Eileen Wader. I'm Director of Corporate Relations and Strategic Partnerships at the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. As the operator of Toronto Pearson International Airport, the GTA recognizes that airports have impacts such as noise on local communities. While aircraft noise can't be eliminated entirely, we're strongly committed to continuous improvement in noise management. And that is why in 2018 we published an updated noise management action plan, which includes some of our most robust initiatives to date. My colleagues and I are here to report back to Council on a noise monitoring study we undertook in response to Council's motion that was passed on July 23rd, 2018, regarding aircraft noise over Milton. Dr. Colin Novak, Senior Engineer at Acoustic Engineering, whose team undertook the study for us, will present the approach to the study, the results, and the conclusions, following which we can address any questions. Dr. Novak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, councillors, members of the public, good evening. Do we have a presentation? Just a bit of a background about myself. I'm a principal with Acoustic Engineering. I'm also a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Windsor. My area of specialty is acoustics, noise, and psychoacoustics. The purpose of the study that I was asked to undertake was to determine the noise impacts on the community of Milton from the aircraft resulting from direct operations of Toronto Pearson Airport. Before the study, I met with the GTAA people and representatives from the town of Milton, and we collectively chose 6 monitoring locations, 3 of them in the town and 3 of them outside in the surrounding area, specifically Campbellville, Rattlesnake Point, and Kelso Conservation Area. It was I should point out, though, that all the 6 of the locations are directly under the flight paths for Pearson Airport. To give you a bit of an overview of the procedure that we followed, all of the equipment that we used is exactly the same equipment that is employed in the permanent noise monitoring terminals that GTA or the airport operates. Specifically, they're Class 1 instrumentation, with the only difference being that we saved all of our data locally as opposed to using 3G modems to save the data on a server elsewhere. The recordings themselves were 1-minute recordings with the raw data at all 6 locations simultaneously, and we did this for a period of approximately 4 weeks, and for all of those 1-minute measurements we correlated that with the aircraft events, confirmed aircraft events. The noise metrics that we considered as part of the study included the maximum A-weighted sound levels, the minimum A-weighted sound levels, and most importantly, the equivalent 1-minute sound levels. This is most relevant because it's most commonly used noise metric for evaluating impacts on communities, whether they be aircraft, roadway noise, railway noise, or industrial noise, stationary noise sources, as prescribed by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. If we are to look at what I think is the most relevant of the tables from the report itself, we can see the results from all 6 locations. Do I have a mouse? Here we go. From the 6 locations, if I were to take a look at the first one, we divided the data into all aircraft events. So this is the data from the confirmed aircraft events, and the non-events is everything else. In other words, the ambient noise levels. And what we're showing here are the average of all of those 1-minute equivalent sound levels representing the aircraft events, which includes the contribution from the ambient. And then the other number would be the same, the averaged equivalent sound level for all of the time where there were no aircraft. Before we talk about what the data means, there's 2 things I'd like to bring to your attention, since a lot of people aren't familiar with how sound levels can be interpreted. In general, when we're comparing a change in sound level or comparing 2 different sound levels with each other, typically for a person with normal hearing, we need a deviation of at least 3 decibels before the difference can be perceived. So if we were to increase the level 1 decibels, 2 decibels, it wouldn't be till 3 decibels before a person would now say, oh, that now sounds louder or quieter. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention is the fact that in the all aircraft events, that aircraft noise includes the contribution of the ambient sound. So when we add 2 sound levels together, let's say the ambient sound was 60 decibels, and then an aircraft event occurred, and let's say that aircraft was also 60 decibels, the 2 contributions together would result in a sound level of 63 decibels. So the point that I'm trying to make, if the deviation between these 2 numbers is less than 3 decibels, that would mean that the contribution of the aircraft itself is quieter than the ambient level. So keeping those 2 points in mind, if we were to look at the first location, we see a difference between the aircraft events and the non-events of 2 decibels. The way that we would interpret that is that, and again, we're looking at the average of all the 1 minutes. If we're looking at those average in consideration, the aircraft events are, for the most part, unperceptible in terms of the average. That doesn't mean you're not going to hear the aircraft events. What it means is the impact of those events compared to the ambient levels is very minimal. And in fact, when the average in this case is only 2 decibels higher with the aircraft, that means that the average aircraft sound is quieter than the ambient level in that area. Again, doesn't mean you can't hear it, it just means that its contribution is not significant. Now, looking at all 6 of the locations that were chosen, that difference between aircraft and non-aircraft events is less than 3 decibels for all but 2 of the locations, those 2 being Bristol District Park, where we had a difference of 5 decibels, and Kelso, where we had a difference of 6 decibels. However, having said that, for both of those, the aircraft noise, 54 and 50, is not any higher. In fact, at Kelso, it was lower than most of the other locations. The reason for the greater deviation is just simply because those are quieter areas. Kelso Park, where we conducted the measurements, it's a very quiet area, as well as in the central of Bristol District Park, it's very quiet. So having said that, of doing the 4 weeks of monitoring, and considering the 1-minute average comparison between the aircraft events and the events, it was found that a negligible difference, in other words, less than 3 dB, was found at most of the sites, with the exception of Kelso and Bristol District Park. And the reason why those had higher deviations was simply because those areas have very low ambient levels. It doesn't mean that the sound levels impacts are greater in those areas. If you were to read the report and to look at the other metrics that we used, the max and the min levels, the same conclusions can be drawn as can be made from the LEQ measurements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are a couple questions from Council. First, Councillor Best, then I'll call on Councillor Cluett.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. Just one question regarding the aircraft noise. Were you able to differentiate between the passenger aircraft that are flying into Pearson and the private aircraft that are flying in the area? Because I noticed living in that flight path that the private aircraft are actually louder than the jets.
Yeah, no, we only considered the aircraft that are associated with Pearson International Airport, and the majority of those flights, if not close to all of them, are commercial.
So you weren't able to pick up the differences, or is that basically you were focused just on those planes coming in?
It was, we could have did it. It was outside the scope of the study, though. The focus was specifically on Pearson, aircraft associated with Pearson.
Okay, and also you had the decibel levels there. The highest I saw in one of the readings was 61 decibels and lowest in the 50. What would that be equivalent into noise levels? I know there's usually a chart showing what noise levels are to other things. What would be in that 50 to 60 range?
The mid-50s is equivalent to inside your living room while you're watching TV at a very moderate level. Of course, sound levels change with distance. In this room, everything is fairly equidistant from the speaker. When I'm speaking, the level is probably around 60 decibels.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Best. I have Councillor Cluett, and then Councillor Chalmauer, and then Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation. I know it wasn't included in our packages, but there was another report that was included. There was another 200 or so pages in there, so thanks for all that work. And it was really interesting to see that there were some areas at Bristol District Park, which is in sort of the heart of Ward 3, where I represent, and it's one of the lowest rates, one of the lowest levels. Councillor Best took my question as to a comparable rate. You know, many of us around this table can be accused of being over 60 decibels at any time during the day, and that's usually our spouses reminding us about that. But a lot of talk about airplane noises comes from the south of Oakville, and sitting on Halton Regional Council, we've had some presentations from the GTA and others. Can you sort of, in comparison to, if you're familiar with the sound levels from Oakville in the southern part of Halton, in comparison, is it, I guess for the lack of a better term, is it louder down south and quieter up north?
Yeah, to do a comparison, it really depends on what runway is being used and what's being used for an approach or a departure. In general, thinking about the measurements that I made throughout the GTA area, Oakville, when they're running the specific operations that fly over Oakville, are louder in general than what you would experience here in Milton. The two flight paths of the runways that are affecting Milton, there are also two NMTs existing in Mississauga. So whatever you're experiencing, then fly directly over those two NMTs. And in those areas, I can certainly say they're much louder than what you're experiencing here in Milton.
No, because I know that we're from a different proximity to the airport, and we'll have that range. Just, you know, we're looking at the numbers from the different, I guess, the more rural areas. We have like Kelso. Medians are in the 50 for all the events. Would the perception, and then again, this is where we're talking about a lot of the noise, would the perception be, since it's a quieter area than a more urbanized area, when you do have planes going over it, would it sound like the planes, sort of from a perception point of view, be louder than what they are?
It's not that they would sound louder, but you may notice them more. Kelso was a very interesting site because we had a difficult time actually choosing a location to put the microphone, because the obvious places, the ambient levels were too loud for us to monitor. The snow machines and the people approaching the park for skiing made it very difficult. So the place that we ended up monitoring was in the back end, I guess the south end of the park, that is closed to the public. We actually had to get special permission and access to that part of the park. So it was very quiet, but at the same time, there is no one there to either contribute to the ambient noise or hear the aircraft noise. So it was a bit of a unique location.
So if a tree falls in the forest?
Exactly,
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Chalner?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank NAV Canada for the work you're doing in terms of keeping us informed. When I was here my last time around in the 90s, I ended up having the conversations with you directly, and there wasn't an organization that was dealing with municipalities the way you are today. And I've had the opportunity to meet with your staff. I was in on a couple conference calls in the last 30 days. I like the 6 ideas. It's quite an interesting document. The one thing I've seen all the patterns, the flight patterns for the day and evening, and of course off the various areas of the airport. At one time, Milton was fairly heavy, but it's been quite a while. Where do we rank now in terms of the volume of traffic coming from the airport over a given area? Are we still a relatively heavy area or not as heavy as other areas of GTA?
I actually don't have that data available, but we can certainly undertake to get back and show a comparison over time. Yeah. Okay. The data exists, I just don't have it here tonight.
Okay. The other issue that I raised with your staff was when I met them was around a stronger relationship between Milton specifically and NAV Canada. I recognize that Jeff Knoll represents Halton Region on one of the committees, but you know, if it is a case where there still is a heavy volume of air traffic over the municipality, I think there needs to be more formal relationship, staff to staff. I certainly don't mind sitting in on conference calls because I have a number of residents in my part of the community that have been concerned for a long time, decades actually. And I'm not going to ask you to do airport monitoring in Dorset Park or Timberlea, but those areas traditionally it has been busy. So if you can get back to me in terms of, or get back to council with respect to where we sit in the strata of busy municipalities in terms of the air, that'd be appreciated. If there is a formal relationship that you're establishing with the Town of Milton staff, I'd encourage it. It's needed. And I think whenever there's an opportunity for elected representatives to spend time with you, whether it's once a year or twice a year, I would recommend you consider that too, because quite frankly, not to criticize Jeff, I'm not, but the level of information that has come to Milton and Milton's involvement with the airport, quite frankly, has been less than satisfactory. And some of that is self-inflicted, so I'm not pointing the finger at you. But I hope that this is the start of a stronger relationship.
Thank you for your comments. Just one point of clarification. We're here with the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. We work in collaboration with NAV Canada, who's also part of the conversation. And as part of the Noise Management Action Plan, we have made some improvements to the way in which we engage with the elected officials, with the members of the public, and staff to staff. So I'm encouraged to hear that you're noticing, and hopefully that will continue.
Thank you, Councillor Chalner. Councillor Tester-Dirksen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Could you just confirm the dates when the temporary noise monitoring stations were being monitored?
Yes, of course. I don't remember the start date, but it was approximately the second week in December, and I know we finished collecting the data on January 3rd of 2019.
Okay, and in your professional opinions, would you say that that particular time period would reflect a fair representation of how frequent aircraft would be traversing the skies above our town?
In remembering the data that we have, in the report, we actually identified the number of aircraft over the certain days, and it was very typical. In fact, if you were to look at previous studies that we've done during the summer months, the numbers are very comparable, if not even higher.
Thank you. And do you know off the top of your head which municipalities close to Milton have permanent monitoring stations versus temporary?
I guess the closest, there's one in Halton Hills in Georgetown, Oakville to the south, and there are several in Mississauga.
Okay, another question. At what point do you make the decision that a municipality should have a permanent monitoring station versus a temporary one?
The decision to install a permanent one takes into account a lot of factors and is done. It's triggered by a significant change in operations, as happened back in 2012, or a change in the the airport configuration. We don't have an event like that going on right now. We were pleased to respond to the request to provide some measurements according to the study that was just done. But at this point, we're not anticipating that there's a need or a requirement based on the results of the study to install something on a permanent basis.
Okay, so it's basically triggered by a major change in, as you said, airport configuration or something
Or
like that?
operation.
Or operation.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a complaints-driven process. So if you get a large number of people coming forward from a particular place saying, gosh, there's been a significant increase, that's when you would do the temporary monitoring, I presume.
Well, certainly the temporary study is informing our assessment of whether or not there is an issue to be further and more permanently monitored. However, again, there wasn't a change in operations that triggered this event. It was just a request of council. And further to the councillor's comments about us wanting to improve our conversation and dialogue, we engaged Dr. Novak to undertake this study and present the findings here today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions from council. Thank you for your time. Now I'll go on to the next registered delegate, Olga Shushwan. If you could please come forward. If you could please state your name and address. Thank you.
I'm Olga Shochin. I live in Campbellville. I'm here representing an organization that was formed in Campbellville and in Milton in regard to the noise from the airplanes that are flying over Milton and Campbellville. I'm not going to start my presentation because I have some questions and concerns about the presentation by the GTAA. The notice of motion that was passed by council had an objective, and that objective, and I'll read to you, that further information should be used to determine the best sites for permanent installation of noise monitoring procedures and equipment, similar to those provided in the 2015 to neighboring communities, including Oakville and Halton Hills. The 2015-16 study was driven by complaints about noise in Oakville, Halton Hills, and Mississauga. And there was a major study done in 2015-16, and the results of those studies placed permanent noise monitors in Georgetown, in Oakville, in Milton, in Mississauga, and several other communities. In fact, I believe out of that study, there were perhaps 8 new permanent noise monitoring terminals placed. So I am somewhat confused with the presentation and the GTAA, what they have stated to you. And I would like to recommend, picking up on Councillor Challoner's request, to perhaps have more communication in regard to the noise and the monitoring which is going on at the GTAA in regard to our community. The report by Acoustics, and I wasn't prepared and I didn't want to present this, but I think I need to do that. When we looked at this particular report, when we looked at this particular report, we were somewhat concerned, and we had a lot of questions, but we didn't think bringing it up here at Council was the right venue. When we looked at the raw data, there is missing parts to the data collected. For example, on December the 12th, 2018, the data in this report has gaps in it. There is no data after 12:55 p.m., and yet we have reports from the noise office that shows us that low-flying lanes were in our area between 1:34 p.m. and 1:33 p.m. So 33 overflights are somehow missing. That's something we'd like to clarify with a meeting with the GTAA. We have requested a meeting to go over this, but we have not received a response. We have some questions about the placement of microphones. We have a statement from the manufacturer indicating how these microphones should have been placed. On 2 of the locations, at the fire hall and at the art center, they were placed according to the manufacturer's recommendations. The other 4, they were not. In fact, in one place, and I think I've got a picture of it, we have a microphone that's tethered to a tree. We don't know how many branches are above this microphone. This is at Rattlesnake Point. And our question is, does that interfere with the collection of the data? Because at Rattlesnake Point, there were only 4 instances where the maximum decibels were over 70, and that would be far fewer than the other sites. We don't know. We're just questioning it. We need a meeting for clarification. When we looked at the analysis for the data in the 2016 study, which was driven by complaints from neighboring communities, and it was performed by Acoustics, the analysis is quite different from the analysis used for our community. The analysis for our community was based on averages. Well, an average will not reflect the maximum decibel noise levels that this community is experiencing. And we went into the raw data, and we have figures that would indicate we have airplane noise coming over Campbellville and Milton that is 70 plus, and that is a high noise volume. 40 is a volume which you might have in your living room. But when you get to 70, it is quite high, and that is what we are experiencing. What we want to know is the maximum levels, because that is what the ear hears. That is what the individual responds to. And the averages at 50 don't reflect the times where there was in this report where they recorded very loud sounds from low-flying airplane. So we question why there's a difference in the way they analyze the data. And we were told via email from Dr. Collins that it was because they weren't assessing noise volumes with the objective to have permanent noise monitors placed in Milton. And we question why, because the notice of motion clearly states that the objective is to take data and then to establish permanent noise monitors. The time frame for our study was from, I think, December the 11th or 12th to the second day in January. When we looked at the 2015 and 16 study, those temporary monitors were in place for a much longer period of time. In fact, they were in place, I think, for several months, because when we look at their data from 2015-16, the movements, which is every piece of data that they collected, was from 8,808 to 71,422. In our community, they captured 303 to 683 movements. So how does that affect the bottom line in knowing what the noise over our community is over a long period of time? So we need to have a meeting with the GTAA to discuss this and seek some clarification about the noise that we're getting from aircraft in our community. There were some questions asked during the presentation and statements made that perhaps I can clarify a wee bit. So if you bear with me, I'm just not going to follow my original presentation. I'm going to sort of pick it apart. If we look at the raw data from this study in our community, we can see the maximums. So if we look at all the locations, the maximum noise levels are 70 and plus. That doesn't reflect in averages. So these particular high decibel, that's the loudness, that's what you hear, is in line with the study in 2015 and 16. And I'm just going to look at Halton Hills and Oakville. During that study, the maximums, because the analysis back in 2015 and 16 was done partially on maximums. What we heard today included only averages, not maximums. And we know from looking at the raw data, as I just said, we do have maximums that are well above 70 decibels. And back in 2016, Halton Hills maximum was 77 decibels. Oakville was 78 decibels. That would be in line with what we have on our raw data here in town. Based on that, those figures, terminals, permanent noise terminals, were put in Halton Hills and put into Oakville. What I heard today was exact opposite. And I'm disturbed and concerned. And I think there has to be a meeting between the town, the GTAA, and the residents of this community to clear those statements up. Because it's just doesn't reflect what is really happening. You were asking about movements. Okay. This is a map that shows movements of planes in our area in September of 2017. There are 6 runways at the airport. 3 are west, east, and 2 are north-south. This is Campbellville, Milton, Kelso, Rattlesnake Point. At times, and we're not quite certain why, the airplanes are flying toward the airport and they are redirected away from the airport, perhaps because of capacity at the airport, we're not quite sure. These are called downwinds. So they fly, they're redirected right out to Moffett, they loop, and then they align toward the airport to land. And then we have our straight-in arrivals, and they then mesh in with downwinds and go toward the airport. In 2017, most of the traffic was in the north end. The green are departures, and there's a lot of departures because the west-east runways are most used, and Milton and Campbellville is in line with the east-west runways. If we take a look at the south end of town in 2017, we don't see a lot of south downwinds.
Sorry, I apologize to interrupt. I just want to say you're approaching the time limit. Is a few minutes more okay?
Right. Don't you think this is important?
It is important, but we have a time limit.
If we fast forward to 2019 and look at the southern part of town, we can see there's a dramatic increase of aircraft. And they are looping around and then coming to the west-east runways. This is a dramatic increase from 2017. So we're having more airplanes flying in our area. They are flying at low altitudes, they're producing noise that are above 70 decibels. And that is of concern, okay? It's affecting residents quite dramatically. We have an autistic child that lives in the Thompson, Maine area. When these planes come over his home, and 70 decibels is equal to the vacuum cleaner going off, the boy is upset, he screams, and it's happening frequently. So I'm here trying to get some meetings started with the GTAA to clear up this study, to look at the motion and the objective of the motion, because I think the motion is clear. The study was to determine where the sites should be for permanent noise monitors. We have the data that is comparable to 2015-16 studies that resulted in permanent noise monitors being placed in Halton Hills, in Oakville, parts of Mississauga. I'll stop there.
Thank you. If you could please remain, there's a question from a member of council. Councillor Chalnell, you had a question for Ms. Smith?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. The reason, Olga, I asked the delegation for the volume of traffic was I want an accurate comparison in terms of where Milton is in the spectrum of communities around the airport that have a volume of aircraft. What you showed shows Milton, but it doesn't show everything. And I've seen the map that shows all movement from the airport, and I'd like to know from their staff, and they will get back to me, and they'll get back to you as well, in terms of what that volume is. I'll be honest with you, I'm not as much interested in getting permanent monitoring devices as I am in dealing with the problem. The fact of the matter is that the monitoring equipment is probably going to tell us something that we already know. What we want to know is how are they going to mitigate the situation? What steps are they going to take to reduce traffic where feasible, to get it to a point where we see it less and we hear it less, which is going to be difficult. But I don't know if you've taken a look at the documentation they've produced recently, the 6 ideas as an example. Those are the kinds of discussions I think are important. I'm not really interested in getting permanent noise data. I think I pretty much know what it is. We had it presented this evening. It won't be much different today than it is 6 months from now unless the volume increases. So I want to know from you, are you interested in resolving the issue, in fact, in finding a permanent solution for the airport, or do you just want to know how much noise they make?
We need to know, first of all, how much noise they make in order to assess any program. Right now, we do not have a method of recording objectively the noise volume. We can get reports from the noise office, but they will not include the decibel level. The only way we can include the decibel level and know the noise is through these terminals. Any program that is implemented, we need to know what the decibel levels are before, and then we can measure after. We need the permanent noise monitors in order to really do a good assessment and to gather data. We don't have that.
Well, I would say that we do have it, and it's time to get on with finding a long-term solution. And what I'm interested in, which is why I asked for a more permanent relationship between staff and staff here and the airport, is to start to work on that. Work is being done today. I've been involved in a couple of the conference calls in the last few months, so work is being done. But what I want to know is, where's Milton in the pecking order in terms of the issue? At one point, it was a busy place in terms of airport activity. I don't know what it is today, and I need to know that. They're going to get that information for me. But as far as I'm concerned, we have a relatively good sense of what the decibel levels are. What we don't have a good sense of is how it's going to be resolved, because at the end of the day, after a while, I would say a very short period of time, you're going to be tired of hearing it and hearing it and hearing it and knowing what it is, but also knowing that nothing is being done. What we need to do is work with the airport to get something done that changes the current situation regardless of the decibel level.
Well, how would we be able to assess any program if we don't have a baseline?
That's been done. We already have that information.
Where?
It was presented this evening.
Okay, that was a short-term assessment, 4 weeks. Our neighbors get it 24/7
Sorry, I just want to try
all year.
Stop the side dialogue and have questions go through the chair.
Yep. Anyway, I'm satisfied, Mr. Chairman, that we have the information that we need in terms of decibel levels. I'm not satisfied that we have the information we need to change the situation.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, you had a question for the delegate?
Actually, I'm thinking now it might be more of a question for staff. I was wondering how the decision was made to place the temporary noise monitoring stations.
Is Jody coming there? Are there any more questions for the delegate? I just don't want to leave her there.
Okay, I'll ask my question of the delegate first, if I can.
Thank you, Councillor.
So, Olga, Ms. Shuchin, the data that you presented, what was your source for that? Where did you find the maximum decibel levels?
I found it in the data which was produced from the temporary noise monitoring. What was done is the data that was presented tonight by acoustics, they did the averages. They ignored the maximums. And the maximums are important because that is what we hear. That is what your citizens hear. That is what they respond to. So the averages that were presented don't reflect the actual loud volume that is going over our community.
I understand, and I think that's a fair comment. I think practically speaking, what we hear, if it is a maximum decibel at not every time an aircraft passes over, but, you know, infrequently or frequently. But getting back to what Councillor Challenor said, if, say, if we did have permanent monitoring stations established and the data came back showing that, reflecting basically what was presented tonight only on a larger basis, or that perhaps they include maximum decibels, whatever. The ultimate solution, what are we looking for? Because, well, we need aircraft. We live near an airport. I think the issue is making sure that every community around the airport is equally bearing the brunt of the noise interference. I think the concern would be if we establish that Milton, for one reason or another, is getting more than other communities. That would be a concern. But if communities all around the airport are kind of equally sharing this burden, I'm not sure how much further you could go as far as solutions go until you start altering aircraft. And I know there are technologies available to mufflers and whatnot that can reduce the amount of noise coming from aircraft that are not required in Canada, I believe, but in other places they are. So I guess ultimately the question is, do you need to see permanent monitoring in order to get the result you need to seek the solutions you're looking for, just as Councillor Challenor said?
The answer is yes. Without the data, how do you know any program is working? We don't know if the programs that GTAA is proposing are going to work. We don't have any data before. Our communities do have that. So when these programs are implemented, they can look at the data, they can look at the loudness of the airplanes, and they can see if the program is working. We cannot do that. Without permanent noise monitors, we don't know what the data is. So there are some programs that the GTAA is implementing. Are they working in our community? I don't know. Are they working in Georgetown or Oakville? I don't know, because I don't have that data. So we need the permanent noise monitors to know how loud these airplanes are on a 24/7 basis. Then we can take programs and look to see if they are working or not. We might be able to look at strategies. Right now, the airplanes are flying over residential communities. There is perhaps an opportunity for them to fly north into the commercial area, slightly north of the 401. We could work on that. But has that reduced the noise? We don't know unless we have baseline data. You don't do an experiment to see if something has worked without having your data beforehand. And these noise monitors are not going to cost the town anything. They are put in and they are monitored by the GTAA. Brampton has 6 noise monitors. They reported slightly over 1,000 complaints to the noise office in all of 2018. 18,000 plus complaints came from Milton. I think that tells us that there is a lot of noise and it is having a negative impact on the residents in this community.
Okay. All right. Thank you for answering my question, and maybe I'll get back to staff later.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions for the delegate, thank you, Ms. Sushran. So, Councillor Dirksen, did I hear that you had a question for staff?
Yes, the question was with respect to how the locations for the temporary noise monitoring stations was determined.
Thank you. I see Ms. Sales coming to answer that.
Through the chair, the 6 noise monitoring locations were developed collaboratively between Quality Airspace, Campbellville, Milton, town staff, and the GTAA, as well as Dr. Novak. During his presentation, you heard about some of the requirements. ambient noise, for example, being problematic with some of the machinery at Kelso, the echo off the 401, those kinds of things. So there was a site visit done in tandem. We also had to look at properties where we had access to install them. So in many cases, in all cases, you saw these were town properties or properties that regional partners could share with us. So those were criteria we began with. And Quality Airspace, Campbellville, Milton also came to the table with some locations of primary concern that were included in the selection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you have a question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Ms. Sushin made mention of roughly 1,000 complaints coming out of Brampton and 18,000 coming out of Milton. Those are fairly significant numbers. Would there be, to the best of your knowledge, would there have been 18,000 individuals complaining to the GTAA, or would there be 4 or 5 people or 10 people to bring those numbers up? Do we have those stats? I'm just wondering, if there was 18,000 people, then I'd really be concerned. So do you have any figures on any of that?
I do, Mr. Mayor, through you. You will find the data, I believe, in the covering report. 18,000 complaints. My understanding from the Greater Toronto Airports Authority is that that's 78 total individuals, I believe it is, and a majority of those complaints from a smaller group of folks.
Okay, and I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that's important to know. Then there's not 18,000 people complaining, but 18,000 complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Duly noted. So, are there any other, Councillor Challoner, a question or a comment?
Just a question of you, whether or not you feel it's appropriate. There were some questions that were asked by the delegate that perhaps, given the GTAA is here right now, they may feel that they could answer those questions immediately as opposed to a letter or an email, if you're agreeable to that and if they feel they want to do that.
I did ask that question of the clerk, and
Well, if they didn't want to answer right now, they certainly could, Mr. Chairman.
if a majority of council would wish that, we could ask the delegate if they do want to respond to that question. It's up to council.
I would move that, Mr. Chairman. They be given the opportunity if they wish.
All in favor? Would the delegates from the GT, I see Ms. Sales would like to come first. I'm not sure.
As the delegates' questions are of a fairly substantial technical nature, we believe that they're potentially best handled in a meeting that the town would be happy to facilitate with Quality Airspace Campbellville Milton related to how they've interpreted the data, if that suits the will of council.
So I understand Mr. Sushin's group and the delegates will have a meeting to clarify the answers and questions. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, does that satisfy your concern? Thank you. Okay, seeing no more comments or questions, I will read out the motion. It's moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali. Councillor Resolution 06418, Aircraft Nose Monitoring. Be it resolved, the report ES 01119 be received for information. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda list is Staff Report PD 02019. Technical report regards the proposed zoning bylaw amendment by Howland Green, Bronte West Limited for lands located at 710 Bronte Street South. I believe we have someone, Molly, I'm sorry about the name, Kushma, Planner for Development Review and Planning and Development, to do a presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair DiLorenzo, Mayor Krantz, and members of council. Staff have completed the review for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and are before you this evening with a recommendation for approval with holding conditions for the application at 710 Bronte Street South. The application proposes to construct a 6-story, 132-unit apartment building on the property. The lands are designated residential office area, which permits an apartment building with a maximum density of 150 units per net hectare and a maximum height of 8 stories. The proposed development represents a maximum of 117 units per net hectare with a maximum height of 6 stories. It's noted that the subject's lands have been considered to be developed for residential high-density use since Phase 3 of the Elkford subdivision was proposed. Further, Schedule M of the subdivision agreement is registered on title for all properties within Phase 3, which advises future purchasers of future high-density development, including apartment buildings, on these lands. The lands are currently zoned future development, so a site-specific rezoning is required in order to facilitate the development. The applicant is seeking to rezone the land site-specific residential medium density 2, which will permit the development to be sited as currently proposed, with a reduction in the off-street parking requirements, and will further require an increased minimum amount of bicycle parking spaces for both residents and visitors, as well as permit a fence within the front yard along the west property line. A holding provision is proposed to be added to the lands, which is not able to be removed by council until such time as the region confirms that servicing allocation has been secured, and until such time as the applicant has demonstrated that all proposed transportation and management measures have been met to the satisfaction of the town. A public information center was held by the applicant and their consulting team on October 19th, 2017. 3 members of the public attended the PIC to obtain additional information on the development. The statutory public meeting was held by the town on January 29th, 2018. Written correspondence from the public with concerns and in opposition to the proposed development was received and is included as an appendix to the planning report. At the public meeting, residents spoke in both opposition and support to the proposed development, and since the publication of the planning report, additional letters of concern have been received, which have been provided to council for their review. The predominant concern that's been raised by the public relates to traffic implications associated with the existing local road network and preferred access to the building to be from Bronte Street or Derry Road. Derry Road is a regional road, and the region does not support access onto Derry Road because of the proximity to the intersection, the significant change in grade from the lands to Derry Road, and the visual impact that's caused by the railway crossing. Similarly, the town does not support an access onto Bronte Street South due to the proximity of the site to the intersection at Derry and Bronte. A traffic impact study was submitted and reviewed by staff, and it is the opinion of staff that the adjacent road network is able to accommodate the additional traffic while maintaining the intent of the existing road network as local roads. We have town engineering staff in attendance with us this evening to answer any questions that council may have as it relates to traffic and parking implications associated with the development. Based on a full review of the application, staff is of the opinion that the proposed development conforms to provincial and regional planning policies and meets the intent of local planning policies. Based on the foregoing, it's staff's opinion that the application be approved, subject to the site-specific provisions and holding condition that have been identified in the draft site-specific zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. I had 2 questions from council members. Councillor Zishant, Councillor Hamid, and then Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good question. What is the current height required under the current zoning at this site?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So currently the property is zoned future development, which only permits the current existing use, and it's a vacant property. The residential medium density 2 provisions permit up to 8 stories in height, and it's 6 proposed.
Got it. Now, you already mentioned the access from Derry and Bronte. Was right in from Derry and right out onto Bronte considered at all, or is that something that was an option?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that Michael Turco answer that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did consider a right-in, right-out access onto Bronte Street South. However, because of the existing access to the north to the commercial property there in the corner, we aren't able to extend the concrete median, which would restrict it to right-in, right-out. because we can't retroactively go back and remove that full moose access. We could look at something like a Pork Chop Island, however, we do not prefer that scenario in that Pork Chop Islands are not as effective as extending the concrete median, and so it wouldn't be in our best interest to explore that opportunity.
Okay, I have more comments later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamid. Councillor Ali, you also had a question?
I had a question to staff. The commercial unit at the corner of Bronte and Derry, is it the same owner as Howland Green?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, that's a separate owner, and it's not part of this application.
Good to know. I'll have comments later. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions from Council or the delegate, thank you for your presentation. Next on the delegation list, I have Glenn Wellings from Wellings Planning and Consultants.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman, council members. My name is Glenn Wellings. I'm planning consultant for Howland Green, and I'm here to provide a few comments on the application before you. Mr. Chairman, we do also have in attendance Dave De Silva and Lucy Orsi from Howland Green. We have the project architect, John McAlpine, and the project traffic engineer, Peter Yu. So we're certainly happy to answer any questions as they arise. We've worked very hard to get to this point, Mr. Chairman. We would like to extend our appreciation to Ms. Kuchma for managing this file on behalf of the town for the past 18 months. It has been about 18 months to get to this point since we filed the application. We are in support of the planning staff recommendation before council this evening, and as council is aware, the application involves a rezoning application for a 6-story development consisting of 132 condominium apartment units. As Ms. Kuchma mentioned, Mr. Chairman and committee members or council members, the proposal is situated on a property that has been for many years identified for high-density residential purposes. As noted in the town planning staff report on page 2, the subdivision agreement for the adjacent subdivision included notification clauses advising of the potential of an apartment building on this site. So advance warning was clearly provided to the residents, existing residents. The rezoning application, as mentioned by Ms. Kuchma, is consistent with provincial and regional policy and conforms thereto. With respect to the town's official plan as amended by official plan amendment number 31, Derry Road is designated as an intensification corridor where redevelopment and intensification is anticipated and expected. The present designation affecting the property, as mentioned by Ms. Kuchma, does permit a maximum height of 8 stories and a maximum permitted density of 150 units per net residential hectare. By comparison, the development before council this evening proposes 6 stories and 117 units per hectare, which is considerably less than the permissions granted by the official plan. So the suggestion, Mr. Chairman and council members, that the project is too tall or too dense for the subject property is simply not supported by the current policy regime. In fact, it's less than what's permitted. The orientation of the building has been situated toward Derry Road as far north and west as possible. And such orientation does reduce any shadow impact and creates a significant buffer between the proposed building and the adjacent residential development. And as a note, Mr. Chairman, as following the rezoning application and following the approval of the rezoning, there will be a site plan approval process where matters such as building, articulation, architectural expression, and other site development matters will be further reviewed and assessed by town staff. With respect to traffic, as Ms. Kuchma mentioned, a significant amount of concern regarding traffic. As mentioned, direct access to Derry Road and Bronte Street South is not permitted by the region or the town, respectively. Howland Green was made aware of these concerns and restrictions very early on in the planning process. It did not come as new news to us, and as such, we did plan around that restriction. Therefore, the use of Transom Crescent and Megson Terrace for access is the only option available. There has been a thorough review of traffic impact by our traffic engineer, as well as town and regional transportation staff, and town and region are satisfied with the proposed development. With respect to concerns regarding traffic safety and future construction, Howland Green plans to employ what they call a designated site monitor as a liaison between existing residents and Howland Green. And that's in response to some of the traffic concerns, safety concerns that have been raised. And such a site monitor has been successfully employed and used by Howland Green in some of their other projects in the city of Markham. So I think it's a very forward-thinking approach, and an approach where if residents do have concerns, that there is a designated individual that could respond to those concerns or remedy the concerns raised. But just a caution, Howland Green cannot control existing enforcement issues unrelated to this development. That's a matter of policing responsibility, but Howland Green can certainly play a role in managing their own project in relation to traffic concerns, traffic safety issues affecting the immediate neighborhood. So it is a branch to outreach to the residents and have dialogue moving forward. Lastly, Howland Green is proposing a number of sustainable green initiatives for the proposed building, which includes geothermal technology, solar panels, high-efficiency lighting, and obtaining all energy required for the building from renewable resources. So there is some strong green initiatives that are proposed for this building. So, Mr. Chairman, council members, happy to answer any questions and respond to the public delegations, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wellings. I do have one question from a member of Councillor. Councillor Hamid, you had a question for the delegate?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Quick question. So the land adjacent to Bronte Street, just south of the plaza, what is the future plan of that parcel? Do you know?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Hamid, no future plans at this stage. It's just a vacant piece of property for now.
Okay, well, I assume that a vacant piece of property at some point will be developed for something which will need access, and it will likely have access on Bronte. So my question is, why can that future, and it will likely be a commercial property, why can that have access from Bronte, but this unit cannot?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, that's not a question for me. We've been given the restrictions. We've been told access is not permitted to Derry Road, and Ms. Kuchma mentioned the concern about access to Derry Road, not just because it's a regional road, but there's significant grade and underpass issues. The town has made a decision not to allow for direct access to Bronte Street South, and that message has been provided to us. So it's not really an answer, Council. I'm not ducking the question. It's not an answer I can provide.
Got it. Thank you. I'll direct the question to staff later then.
Seeing no further questions. Oh, sorry. Councillor Ali has a question.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, I was looking at the traffic impact study, and I see that there's going to be a significantly big garbage bin that's going to be placed. Now, I want to know if that garbage, where will that be located? Would it be inside the boundaries, or would it be outside?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to call on the architect, Mr. McAlpine, to respond, but the garbage facility is contained within the site, but okay. I'll have the architect, Mr. McAlpine, respond to the rest of that question.
Thank you.
Thanks. If you please state your name.
Yes, name's John McAlpine with Keith Loeffler McAlpine Architects, project architect for Howland Green. So through you, Mr. Chairman, the area on the site plan that is noted for garbage is for garbage pickup only. No bin is there, and no storage of garbage would take place there. All the garbage is stored internally in the underground, and then it's brought out on pickup day only, placed on the pad, and then taken away.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Welling. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I would like to call Chuck Woody Nwanko as a registered delegate to speak. Thank you, sir, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Also, please keep in mind we do try to keep a 10-minute limit, but we can go over that with the courtesy of the Mayor Staff Council. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, all. So my name is Chukwudi Nwanko, and I live on 869 Transom. And I'm here with my wife and some of the other residents to voice our concerns with the proposed building in our neighborhood. So currently, I know it's been mentioned that it's going to be a 6-story, and that's below the recommendation or what's allowed. When we bought this house, so when we bought our house in that area, we bought with knowing obviously that there'll be something put up, but that was mentioned as to the height of the building and how much obstruction we're going to have to our view of the escarpment. And from the plan that I see now, it's going to be significant, obviously. And when we're asking that if nothing else can be done, at least the height of the building be dropped to a maximum of 4 stories to help deal with that part of our issue. And that being an issue, that's not even the most pressing issue. Our primary concerns really is for the building exit into Transom Crescent from the basement, as well as Mexon and Asphalton. This is a major safety concern for us and for all the many kids and families that use that walk path on a daily basis. There are several school buses that stop in our subdivision. There's several kids on a daily basis that catch buses at different times. So to say the least, it's going to be a crazy situation, and it's going to put everyone more in harm's way than there already is. In addition to this, all the traffic coming from this building is going to bottleneck at the light at Bronte and McLaughlin. Right now, it's already a hectic situation. Channeling all that traffic from that location is just going to make an already bad situation even worse. There's parents and kids and strollers, and it's one access for everyone, and just channeling this condo and all its traffic through that one light as well is just going to make that situation way worse than it already is or needs to be. So we're asking, even though we've heard from the various parties, that this traffic or this exit not be allowed, but be redirected onto Bronte or Derry. And I know that there's been significant argument made contrary, but I'd like to insist that we're not asking for the council to make an easy decision, but then considering the families that are represented here and the lives that are going to be changed. My kids, I have 2 kids, they both grew up in this community. We've been there for 6 years. This is all they know as home and as life, and this is going to change significantly for my family and for everyone. With all that traffic, and if I have to go get a bag of milk, because I forget, there's one way out, and then I'm going to multiply that by all those vehicles from that, if that's the same situation, they're all going to be going out and coming back in through that channel. So I really strongly hope that you guys can consider or reconsider what's already, or whatever the roadblocks are or red tapes are, so to speak. There is nothing impossible. We just have to find a way around it. And I think putting families first should be our first priority. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your delegation. I don't see any questions from the council members. Thank you. Going further down the delegation list, I have Bernadette Nareen listed to come forward and speak on the recommendation.
Good evening. Just to add to what he said, he pretty much covered all the complaints and that we kind of have and all the concerns we have. And I actually heard tonight from Zia. That was one of my questions actually that I had, because right now they're saying that the only access is Transom Crescent right now, but there is a commercial building right there, and there's access to it. There's two ways: there's Derry and there's Bronte, and we go in there because this is where our dental is. And why is there access to there? So why can't there be access for that building that's coming in? Why does it have to use Transom? Why can't it use Derry or Bronte, which is what the commercial is using right now? So why can't they use that street instead for them to come in, or which way? Why does it have to be Transom? There is a school there, also the senior home. There is also, I mean, you see buses. If you go, I don't know when they did that. They said they made they made a survey about the traffic. I don't know what time they took that survey or how they did it, because right now our street is getting very busy. We see it all the time. I mean, I go to work and I try to get that light. You can't even get to there to make it on time. You got to still wait. So with all that traffic that will be coming in, how is that going to help us when they say this is Transom, only Transom and Mexican service? How is that there is Derry and there is Bronte? Why can't they use those two? They just say no to it. And there's a commercial building that's using it right now. So how are we going to solve this? Is there a way that they can, you see, our problem is, okay, the building is going to come and we know it's going to come, but it's the traffic that will be coming on our street. That's our biggest concern for our children. So is there a way that they're going to resolve this? Because from what I'm hearing right now is that that's the only way, and what we're seeing, that couldn't be the only way, because there is a building that already exists right there, and there is access to it. So all we're asking is that if there is already access, there's a commercial building there, it's at least if one way, they can't have it both ways coming in, so going in and out. If a way like either you come through Derry or go through Bronte, have a one way or whichever way, but have all the traffic coming on and Transom Crescent, yeah, to me, is not a way. With 6-story building, 115 people, most time nowadays, everybody has 2 cars, so just think about that. So 115 building, right, apartments. If everybody there had 2 cars, just imagine how many people with us in there going in and out. So that's what I would like you all to take into consideration and to see if there is an alternative route for those people in the building to come instead of on our street. We really don't want this heavy traffic on our street. It's a safety issue for us and our children. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Noreen. If you could please stay there for a moment. There was a question from Councillor Ali.
Yeah.
Hi, Bernadette. Thank you. Welcome to council. Thank you so much for coming up and voicing your opinion. It is very brave of you, and you did very well. Appreciate it. I also had a question regarding the parking situation on Transom. How would you describe the parking situation on the other side of your home where cars are allowed to park? Are you able to find a spot there, or it's always busy?
Actually, it's not right now. It's not very busy. And sometimes our neighbors, they will park, but everybody knows the limit. Everybody parks back in their thing, but it's not very busy. So just imagine if that building comes, it's going to be busy. And some people, even from the hospital, they don't use it. They use that commercial place, actually. Some people are parking there at the commercial place, and they go over to the hospital. And sometimes there is parking bias, but it's not very busy right now. So if that building comes there, it's going to be busy, and people will be parking there.
I understand. Thank you so much for sharing that. Would it be okay for me to now ask staff to answer the questions she had?
I believe after the delegation is present, then we'll have questions for staff members.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Noreen. Next on the delegation list, I have Nancy Mott. If you could please come forward. Thank you, Ms. Mott.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of council. I am Nancy Mott, and I live on Megson Terrace. I want to begin by echoing the comments of the previous speakers. Hopefully we can put that up there. Thank you. I spoke at the public meeting in opposition to the rezoning. I am still opposed. I thoroughly read the staff report. I've spoken to my councillors. I think I cornered the mayor, Tim Hortons, one day, unfortunately, for him when he was trying to do something else. I've spoken to the planning consultant. I did not rest on my laurels between the public meeting and now. I have really, really tried to get more consultation on this. There was none. So I certainly respect the opinion of the planner who wrote the report, but in terms of the unique details of our community, those really haven't come out, and they're starting to come out tonight, and I hope I can reinforce what some of the previous speakers have said. I'd like to begin by saying that notwithstanding that the official plan provides for 8 stories at that location, the official plan provides a framework for decision-making by this council looking at the unique considerations of any particular property. It's not a straitjacket. Proposals for intensification must be balanced against the unique characteristics of the site before increased density is approved. This property is not suitable for intensification at the density that's proposed. That's my position, and here are some of the additional reasons that support that. We've already heard about the limitations on access to the property. But let's also look at some of the other characteristics of our neighborhood. It doesn't really show here too well here, but in case you're not familiar, that is the railway. There's a solid noise wall all the way down here. You can't see it here, but all of the parking for the hospital, for the folks who don't want to pay for hospital parking, lines up down here every day. So it's not that we're all going out in the morning, coming back at night. All day long, there are people coming in here and parking all day long, all the way down here. There are no street traffic speed signs anywhere in the neighborhood. I mean, we all know the right thing to do, maximum 50 unless otherwise posted. I don't know where the gentleman with the motorcycle lives, but he's not doing 50. So there are no speed limit signs anywhere in this neighborhood to give you that reinforcement that really you ought to slow down. Rolling stops are frequent, particular when you come to this point here and go around the corner. That's a famous rolling stop right there. I did talk to Mr. Turco, and he was very kind to give me some additional information. What doesn't really come out here, you can't really tell, is that many of these streets are more narrow than normal local roads. They're not 20 meters wide, they're only 16 meters wide. And we have winter. And if any of you were familiar with this neighborhood during the winter, what happens is, because we're a dead end, we're on the lowest possible priority for snow clearing. We're lucky to get one pass of the snow plowed down the middle of the road 24 to 36 hours after the snow has fallen. And as time goes on, the road gets narrower and narrower and narrower, so it gets to the point where you sort of have to pull aside to let somebody come past you. So you don't have the full 16 meters for like 6 months of the year. You're lucky if you have 12. So combined with the parking, the narrowness of the roads, winter, there is perhaps, technically speaking, capacity for sufficient traffic to move through these roads, but that's under ideal conditions, and most of the time we don't have ideal conditions. The planning consultant who spoke earlier said, well, you know, it's not our fault. There may be problems in the area, but, you know, it's not our fault. But by doing that and allowing this development to go ahead, what you're basically saying is, throw up our hands, we'll let the members of the community become the enforcement mechanism for traffic. That's not our role. We shouldn't be having to call our counselor, call the police, call whoever to say, oh, another problem, another problem, another problem. We do have congestion because very few people in Milton take transit. Again, thanks to Mr. Turco, apparently only 2% of people in Milton take transit to get to work. So while they may be offering bus tickets to a few folks who are going to live in that building, we all know that most of us work outside Milton, and taking transit isn't an opportunity. I work in Georgetown. To get to Georgetown on public transit, I'd have to go to Toronto and come back on another line. I don't know how long that would take. It'd probably cost me $60. It's just not an option. So having a reduced parking allowance in that building and giving a few people bus tickets is not going to solve the problem. We're going to be jammed with traffic, and getting out to get to work or wherever we have to go in the morning is going to be a problem. So we've heard a lot about traffic, and that's all I'm going to say about traffic, but I'd also like to talk about the built form of this building. No disrespect to the architect. But as one of the first speakers said, the view to the north is the only view we have. We're bounded in by the noise wall, we're bounded in by the hospital. Our view out of the neighborhood is in that direction. And this building is a solid wall from west to east. I took a look at a very good document that Council had approved, I believe, last year, May 2018, the Mid-Rise Guidelines for Development. Excellent document. This doesn't meet that document. Good urban design and the town's own guidelines would suggest varied roof heights and a break in the built form to maintain some of the view and to limit the oppressive feeling of the proposed building. As stated in the guidelines, mid-rise buildings can integrate harmoniously with their surroundings, provided that the massing and scale of the building carefully transitions to the adjacent low-rise neighborhood. There is no careful transition here. That's a solid wall from west to east. No break, no variation in height, no place through the site where you can see to the north. It'll just be a solid wall. So again, I'd just like to say I think this should be sent back to the drawing board. It is too big for the site. However, if you choose not to defer your decision to allow additional community consultation regarding the development, here are some suggestions. No construction access on local streets. Having a fellow in a hard hat holding up traffic is not going to do it for me. That's not the right solution. If the rest of their property can have access to Bronte Street, that's where the construction access should be coming. We should not be subjected to that all summer, all winter, or however long it takes to build the building. Install speed limit signs and lower the speed to 40 kilometers an hour on all of our roads. Install traffic calming measures in consultation with the community. And if you're not familiar with the term traffic calming, it can be any number of things to do that. Changing the outline of the road, lowering the speeds, painting lines, putting in speed humps. Any number of these things can help calm the neighborhood to protect the residents of the community. Commit to improving the quality and timeliness of snow removal on all of our streets. During the winter, even as bad as it was, there was bare pavement in front of the stormwater detention pond. Nobody lives in the stormwater detention pond. So you have to improve the snow clearing in our neighborhood. Monitor the signal timing at Bronte and McLaughlin to ensure a smooth flow of traffic out of the neighborhood. As with this previous speakers mentioned, you have to gun it on McLaughlin, which you shouldn't do, but you have to gun it to get maybe 4 cars out before the signal timing changes. That's not going to work if this thing gets approved. And finally, increased parking enforcement. We are lovers of cars in Milton. We park on our lawns, we park on our driveways, we park sideways on the end of our driveways, we park any which way we can. And we frequently call to complain about people parking in every which way and everywhere, front ways, back ways, sideways. We have to have more timely parking enforcement. But again, allowing this development forces us to be those monitors of all of those things, and that's really shouldn't be our role. What should happen is you send this back to staff for further discussion, you send it back to the community for further discussion, or you just turn it down. It's too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mott. I don't see any members. Oh, Councillor Ali had a question.
Thank you, Nancy, for coming out tonight. I appreciate your comments. I just wanted to know if you had a background in planning.
Yes, I do. I am a registered professional planner. I have been a planner since 1984. I don't work in the town or for the town, just to make sure nobody's concerned that I'm treading into what I normally do for a living. But yes, I am a registered professional planner.
Good to know. Thank you. That was a very professional presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Sorry, Ms. Mott, I had one comment. You did mention traffic calming. The town does have a traffic calming policy, and the way I understand, residents can submit a written request to have their street analyzed for traffic calming. I'm happy, or the planning will probably be happy to talk to you outside of a council meeting on how to submit that request if you are interested.
Thank you. As a last resort.
I understand. Thank you, Ms.
And I have an extra copy of my comments if anybody would like them. Shall I give them to Molly? Clerk?
The clerk, I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call upon the next delegate now. I have Vanessa Silverman listed as a delegate. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and Mayor Krantz, esteemed council members, and members of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you this evening regarding the Howland Green condominium development in my community. My name is Vanessa Silverman, and I own a home on McLaughlin Avenue, the local road which will be directly impacted by resident traffic generated by the Howland Green condominium development. I have lived in my home for 7 years, having purchased my home from the builder. I purchased it pre-build at a time when the land in question was intended to be used to build additional townhomes or semi-detached homes. In these 7 years, I have seen numerous changes to my neighborhood, and quite frankly, very few of those changes have been positive. McLaughlin Avenue is the local road residents use to exit onto Bronte Street. It includes residents of McLaughlin Avenue, Megson Terrace, Munch Place, Transom Crescent, Sugden Terrace, and Asleton Boulevard. Residents from the neighboring Mattamy development to the south of my neighborhood, who for whatever reason will not use Rule Drive as an exit onto Bronte Street, but will drive north to McLaughlin to exit onto Bronte Street instead. I see commercial and construction vehicles also use McLaughlin Avenue as the means to enter my neighborhood and to enter the Mattamy community to the south of my home via Asleton Boulevard, again bypassing Rule Drive. There are numerous school buses that enter my neighborhood via McLaughlin Avenue and again use McLaughlin Avenue to continue their journey south into the Mattamy community. We also have the Seasons Retirement Community Home in my neighborhood on Sugden Terrace, which brings additional traffic onto McLaughlin Avenue from visitors, staff, and commercial vehicles which provide supplies to the retirement home. Traffic is already congested on McLaughlin Avenue as a result of the aforementioned situations I've described to you. There is constant traffic on McLaughlin Avenue day and night. During morning and late afternoon rush hours, traffic congestion is particularly bad as vehicles and school buses make their way on McLaughlin Avenue. It is not unusual for me to wait 10 minutes or more on my own driveway to leave my home during rush hour. The technical report states, quote, "The proposed development is anticipated to generate a total of 65 trips in the peak AM hours and 76 trips in the peak PM hours. That's approximately one vehicle every 60 seconds during the peak AM and PM hours of traffic. The adjacent road network will be able to accommodate the additional traffic while maintaining the functional intent of Asleton Boulevard as a local collector road. It is fully expected that the annual average daily traffic, AADT volumes, for Asleton Boulevard will remain in the range of a local road," end quote. There is no reference to the impact of additional traffic on McLaughlin Avenue, which will be the only vehicular exit onto Bronte Road for the residents of the Howland Green condominium development. I'm also quite confused why the technical report only refers to an anticipated 65 trips in the peak AM hours and 76 trips in the peak PM hours. I don't understand how those numbers were generated. Does the Howland Green condominium development, an author of that report, believe that at least half of the residents of that condominium are independently wealthy and will not be necessary to leave their residence during the day? The Howland Green condominium development consists of 132 units. As mentioned previously, residents of each unit will have at least one vehicle. That equals an additional 132 vehicles using McLaughlin Avenue to exit onto Bronte Street. How does 132 units and at least 132 vehicles equal only 65 trips in the AM peak hours and 76 in the peak PM hours? The numbers do not make any sense. With the significant escalation in vehicular traffic, what will be the impact on residents because of additional pollution generated by an increase in vehicles being driven in the neighborhood? As I mentioned previously, McLaughlin Avenue is used by residents to exit onto Bronte Street, but also commercial, construction vehicles, and school buses. Now there will be an additional 132 vehicles using McLaughlin Avenue to exit onto Bronte Street. Emissions from cars increase the levels of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, noise, and the level of dust and other airborne pollutants into our homes, impacting our health and well-being. And on that note, are we to expect that construction vehicles are going to use McLaughlin Avenue to get into the Howland Green condominium development just as they did for the Mattamy development, causing months of aggravation and frustration from the noise, dirt, and dust created by the construction vehicles and the damage to the road itself from the use and weight of those vehicles? I also want to bring to your attention there is only one stop sign at the corner of McLaughlin Avenue and Asleton Boulevard, a stop sign no one adheres to in a neighborhood full of children and seniors from the Seasons retirement home. If that was not bad enough, residents seem to mistake McLaughlin Avenue for the Indy 500 as they race along McLaughlin to make the lights. There is no regard for neighborhood speed limits nor for the stop sign, a volatile mix. I can't imagine another 132 vehicles adding to this situation. With the additional vehicular traffic of the Howland Green condominium development, has there been any thought to adding more stop signs and/or speed bumps in the neighborhood to slow down traffic to a manageable and legal level? What exists now is wholly inadequate. I also want to ask, has there any thought been given to how the additional vehicular traffic generated by this condominium development will impact emergency planning if a mass evacuation has to occur? In an instance where the train derails in this community and there is only one exit, McLaughlin Avenue. It's not an absurd scenario given recent events with train derailments. On the Transportation Canada Board Safety website, you can review all the CP and CN train derailments across Canada, and you may be surprised to learn that there is a substantial number of them, an increase of at least 73% since 2014, and it is expected to increase due to the enduring safety gaps, including poor track maintenance. In conclusion, I want to refer to one other item in the technical report, which states, quote, "The purpose of the access management is to maintain a high level of service for through traffic while providing reasonable access to abutting properties. The overall goals are to reduce collisions, reduce energy consumption, and preserve the long-term integrity of the traffic movement function while balancing the needs of all road users," end quote. As a resident of this community, as a homeowner, as someone who lives here and works here, as someone who knows fact from fiction from actually living in this neighborhood, I am confident the increased vehicular traffic caused by the Howland Green condominium development will significantly alter the integrity of my neighborhood, will reduce the enjoyment of my home and neighborhood, and will not by any means achieve the goals set out in the technical report to reduce collisions, reduce energy consumption, and preserve the long-term integrity of traffic movement function. Thank you for your time and attention to my concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. I see no other questions from council members. That is the end of our delegation list. Any questions or comments from council members? I see Councillor Hamid and Councillor Ali. Councillor Hamid?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions, actually, maybe more than a couple of questions to staff. So it seems like the entrance and exit are really from Transom and Mexon. So question to staff, are they currently classified as collector, arterial, local road, like as far as the snow clearing is concerned?
Commissioner Cripps?
To you, Mr. Chairman, I believe Transom and Mexon are both local roads at this time.
And what's the definition of local road versus collector road?
A local road's function is to basically service the area residents or the area, where a collector road is more meant for moving traffic through to a arterial or to an upper tier roadway.
Right, thank you. So essentially what this property will do, Mr. Chair, is that move the traffic off the property through the local road to an arterial road, and that's my main issue. When it comes to providing services like snow clearing, we classify this as a local road, but when it comes to this application, we say, it can function as a collector road, no problem. That's my first concern. Second is, it was brought up in public meeting as well when I think it was the previous term of council, and I was very clear that I cannot support the proposal if the entrance and exit were from these streets. I don't understand why, and I need to hear that now, like I don't understand why the entrance or exit cannot be from Bronte, considering we're on Mary Street right now, or King Street, depending on your perspective. Mary Street and King Street are both closer to the intersection than that entrance would be. So I don't understand how this functions here but not there. Or just further down from that property, there's a very busy drive-through at Highway 25 in Derry that generates significantly more traffic than this property would, but they are right at the intersection, and we're told that we can't have an entrance and exit at this intersection. So I don't understand how more traffic works at all other intersections around this area, but not at this intersection. So I was wondering if I can get some clarification on that, please.
Commissioner Cripps, is that something you feel comfortable answering?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Bronte is a collector road, so we want to keep the entrances as far back away from signalized intersections as possible, so there's less conflict with turning vehicles. The existing development at the southwest corner of Bronte and Derry has an entrance onto Bronte now. That was there before we rebuilt Bronte, so basically in planning terms, it's like a legal non-conforming. If that site were to redevelop, I'm very confident to say that we would eliminate the left outs from that site and extend the concrete medium down Bronte. But we can't do that now because that, like I said, that driveway was there before we could, before we rebuilt Bronte. So that's why that entrance has that luxury. If we bring this entrance for this site out to that same location, we wouldn't have that opportunity to close that off in the future. And as a result, it's less than desirable from a traffic perspective.
So through you, Mr. Chair, why couldn't we have right out that at least takes some traffic away from these other roads? Because we have the Shoppers Plaza, or the first, whatever the plaza is called, where the entrance from Derry, there's a very small cut on the curb that only allows that entrance, and it doesn't allow cars to turn left coming out. Why couldn't that be done here?
Because of that existing entrance on that existing commercial site right at the corner. That's why. Because that site has the left out currently in today's plan. And like I said, if that site were to redevelop, we would eliminate that and extend the island to the south.
Is it possible to put the site plan up? Because I think I'm having trouble explaining what I'm trying to say. Because the entrance to this property would not be adjacent to that entrance. It would be further south. So you can still have an opening for folks from that property to turn left and still close it. Right. See, the entrance is much further north than where presumably the entrance of this property could be.
I think Commissioner Cripps is going to come out and demonstrate.
So this is an aerial photograph of the existing configuration. You can see it doesn't really show up on the projection, but the existing island ends at approximately that location. That's the existing entrance to the commercial plaza that people can go right in and right out, as well as making a left. So if this site were to redevelop, we'd want to extend this island as far to the south as we could, which would effectively cut off a left-hand turn motion from any driveway that we established in this area.
And so how does that preclude us from doing a right out only?
The only way we could preclude a left out is with a pork chop island, which are not effective. So if you put in an entrance there, people will use it for left out, even though it's designed and intended for right in, right out only. We have problems further to the south from here on Bronte, and Councillor will testify to this, is that people are going around the island already to gain access to the plaza at Louis Saint Laurent.
Right. Now, so how far south does this property go? Because my question is not putting the entrance right adjacent to it, but if you look at the other chart, we got to zoom out, I guess.
Zoom out.
Right. So the entrance doesn't have to be adjacent to it. It could be at a southern portion that puts a significant gap. That's my question. The entrance to the plaza is on the north, and the property continues much further south, almost adjacent to Mexican Terrace. So the entrance could be much further south, where it is possible to put a curb to prevent left turn and leave a small opening similar to the opening on Derry for the First Capital Plaza that allows folks coming out of that plaza to turn left, but not from this property, which actually takes a significant amount of traffic away, especially in rush hour.
On the east side of Bronte, we have the entrance to the hospital. So that would complicate the issue in that we still have to get the people in and out of the hospital at that location.
Then what I'm hearing is it's okay to make left turn from that further
let's try
south.
to do this.
But they have
Conversations.
for turning left into the hospital, do you mean?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
What I'm hearing is that if it's okay to turn left from the hospital and turn left onto the hospital, why is it not okay to turn left onto Bronte from the southern portion of that property? Like, why is it okay from one side of the Bronte but not on the other side of Bronte? I'm done asking questions, actually, so you don't have to answer it. My concern is that we're pointing out a bunch of reasons why entrance could not be from that property, and yet exactly across the street, those reasons don't apply. And then we have all these other intersections in Milton where those reasons don't apply. So I'm confused why this property is special. And secondly, with that definition, nothing can ever be done with that land because there will never be an entrance. So why not just figure out how to add that entrance? I sent a picture, I'm not sure if I sent it too late, of Milton Terrace. I would love to be able to show what Milton Terrace actually looked like. It's a very narrow street. Once cars are parked, it's actually hard to even drive speed limit. In the evening, you have kids playing there. And the amount of traffic we're projecting, like Milton is not designed, or neither is Transom for that traffic. These are like local neighborhood streets. These are not collector roads. And entering, building an exit and entrance of a fairly large, condominium or apartment on local roads, not in collector road, is not the right way to go. And finally, if we can't figure out any way to enter and exit, then I would propose that this is probably not the right location for a 6-story building. I don't have questions.
So there are no more questions?
I have comments, but not questions. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cripps. Councillor Ali was next with a question for staff members.
Yeah, I have a question for staff, pretty similar, but it's regarding dairy. So why can't we use the exit we currently have on dairy and for the same project? A. B, on the other side of dairy, where the plaza is, we already have an exit. Why are the grade limitations not applied there, the same that are stopping us from having an exit on dairy?
Commissioner Cripps, I'm not sure if you heard that and that's something a staff member could respond to.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the reason why we can't have access on a Dairy Road is because of the underpass there. The access on the other side of Dairy Road, that was an existing access before the underpass was built. And, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I understand, but that actually is proof that it works.
Following engineering best practices, it's not recommended to have accesses within that close proximity to underpasses. Of course, that being an existing access on the other side of the road, we can't retroactively go and close that access.
Thank you. In all of the comments, thank you, that is all.
Thank you.
In all of the comments I've heard today, I just hear a lot about the future. I don't know about the future, and for the future, we'll have to close off the islands and increase the medium. This is now, this is people who are going to be affected now. So I think we should look at now instead of the future.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Were there any other questions or comments from council members? I see Councillor Hamid and Councillor Ali for comments.
Yeah, I'll make it fast, thank you. So, I mean, I have concerns about the proposal, but not a whole ton of issues that are not workable except for entrance and exit. So I'm looking at staff and you, Mr. Chair, to figure out what the right way to go is. Do I argue that we vote down the entire proposal based on this, or do we send back to staff and ask them to see if there's a way to have entrance and exit from any collector or arterial road and not from a local road? Because that's where we heard that is not recommended, to have that entrance from Derry. It is also not recommended to have entrance and exit from a local road. That's the whole reason why it's not a collector road. So what is the right way to handle this situation? Do we argue for voting it down, even though not much is wrong with it, or do we defer it to the next meeting and ask staff to see if they can come up with a site plan that has entrance and exit not from a local road?
So if you have a motion, I think you need a seconder, but I think your question more is how to phrase?
My question is, do we defer this to a future meeting? Is that a better thing to do in staff or applicant's opinion, or do we argue that it be voted down and then come back later? Like, what is the right way to go? Because I'm not arguing against the entire proposal, period, end of story. I'm arguing that my concerns and residents' concerns need to be addressed, and in this specific site plan, they're not addressed adequately. So I need more work to be done in the site plan. It needs to come back up again. So how do we send it back to staff?
Okay, so I haven't asked for a seconder yet, but I think you have a question of is if you want to propose something forward, is it a deferral or is it a vote down, or what would it be? And then you need a seconder for that. Commissioner Cripps, is that something you could answer, that what Councillor Hamid is trying to do, how would he phrase that, as a deferment or a vote down?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think a deferral is probably a more favorable way of handling it.
Councillor Hamid, is that
because,
what you're proposing?
just to explain, my intention is not for it to end up in front of OMB or LPAD. My intention is that we figure it out internally how to handle it properly, and it seems like asking for it to come back on a future date with a better site plan is the way to go, so we're not actually, sending it to OMB and losing control over it. So I would move to defer it until a better site plan is found, or there's no alternative.
Okay, so we have a vote to defer. I think we would need a seconder. Councillor Ali, we have a seconder for a vote to defer.
I actually wanted to add something.
What's the vote to defer takes priority, or we can have questions?
I would like to add something to the motion.
Just asking the clerk.
Yeah, deferred takes priority, but I think Councillor has a question on the motion.
I would like to add the fact that we also make sure that the development meets town's mid-rise regulations.
Right, I didn't hear that.
I would also like to add that we defer it and come back after additional consultations, and also make sure that the development meets town's mid-rise regulations.
Are there any questions about the motion to defer, or comments to the motion to defer from Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I understand what's being suggested, that deferral, I don't have a big issue with it. I think there should be timelines on it, whether it's at the next council meeting or 30 days or 60 days, because I think Councillor Hamid is absolutely right. If we vote it down, I can predict, and I think every one of us know what's going to happen. I think the big issue is the in and the outs and the traffic movements and all of those nice things, and that can be resolved, and I think it's called a win-win. But if we're not very careful, it'll be lose-lose is what it'll be, and I think what Councillor Hamid is suggesting is appropriate. But I would like to know, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, because it's not only local staff that's involved in this, it's regional as well. So that's a bigger nut to crack if we're talking about that. So it just won't happen overnight or in the next day or two. I know it'll take a period of time, but I'm not suggesting 6 months or a year either. So I'm just wondering, through you to Mr. Cripps, what might be an appropriate time to have this hopefully sorted out to that win-win situation, through you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Cripps, could you answer on that?
Through the chair, I think the next meeting we've got is a relatively short time frame, only about 3.5 or 3 weeks away. So it would probably, the following cycle would be a reasonable time to come back with
so
something.
6 weeks, and
the clerk just mentioned June 24th.
Okay, with that understanding, Mr. Chairman, I can support what's being suggested, but I don't want to drag on. I don't want to vote it down either, because I can predict what will happen. Thank you.
If there, Councillor Malbuff had a question.
Yeah, I'll support the deferral, but I'm really wondering what's going to change in 6 weeks. But anyways, they've been looking at it for 18 months. All of a sudden 6 weeks is going to make a difference. But I'll support the deferral. Let's see what they come back with, to see if there are other options, like Councillor Mead has mentioned. But I'm a little confused about the add-on about the mid-size standards. I believe this, the planning department has approved it. It's zoned for 8 stories. We're looking at 6. So I'm really wondering where Councillor Lee's going with that one. What is she looking for before I vote on that part of it? Because that's part of the deferral, is it not?
Councillor Ali, I wasn't sure when you were adding that as staff direction or if it was part of
This is because the resident brought it up, and I would like it to be taken care of.
It's more just making sure staff directions to
Yes.
look at that to make sure it follows the regulations. I understand. If there are no further questions, I had one question of my own. If we defer this, has the clock already run out? I know we have a timeline for when we have to report to consider applicants like that. Is it already run out, or do we have time to defer it, or could a deferral already be used as a means to go to the OMB?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the applicant is in a position to appeal.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions of Councillor Hamid?
Just a quick comment, I guess directed towards the applicant. I'm not happy with everything, but I'm mostly okay enough that I can hold my nose and vote for it if that one issue is taken care of. So I would hope that the applicant would, work with the town as opposed to bypassing it and appealing to the OMB.
Okay, I think I'm safe to call the vote. Councillor Melba, if you're reaching, or do you have a question?
Might be having a seniors moment here, but okay. So you're saying, through you, is Councillor Hamid saying, okay, he's prepared to support the recommendation and giving staff direction to work with the applicant, or are we voting for deferral and hope the applicant doesn't appeal?
Councillor Hamid clarified, but I think he still wants to go through the deferral.
Yeah, I'd like to go for deferral, and I'm saying that if this one concern was taken into account and it comes back on June 24th with this addressed, I would support the application. I wouldn't come back with, new reasons or new concerns. If everything else stays the same and that one thing changes, that would tip me to hold my nose and vote in support, as opposed to right now, I would argue that it be voted down for the concerns mentioned. So I think 6-week deferral is not a big deal. I think staff and applicant can work something out. We've had a long relationship with the applicant in this town. We'll continue to do business with the applicant in this town. So I'm hoping that we'll work together and figure out the resolution to this one problem.
So we have a mover and a seconder for the defer. Mr. Mayor, question or comment?
Comment and a question, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of the deferral, but I heard again from Councillor Hamid to voting it down. I want to be very clear, we're not voting it down. Yeah. So I want to be really clear on that. We're not voting it down. We're just deferring it.
To make it clear for the record, this is not the town voting the applicant proposal down. It's a deferral to give town staff and the applicant some time to discuss and see if there can or cannot be an adjustment. Okay, I think the final time, I don't see any other questions or comments, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of deferring, please put up your hand. Councillor Ali, do you have another question or comment?
Yes, I had a comment. So the thing that I wanted to add about the mid-rise regulations, if I remove that, are we adding that to the deferral motion, or are we not adding that?
I believe it was just staff direction, so it's not part of the motion. It was just direction to staff.
Yes. Okay, so I would like to remove that, actually.
Okay. One more time. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion's passed. The motion is deferred to a future council meeting. Thank you. Okay, going down our agenda, there was an addition to the agenda. There's an introduction of a notice of motion. So item number 9 that was previously on the agenda for the notice of motion for town support for the Association of Citizens Together in Nassagaweya, Action Milton. That is being, I understand, being replaced with Bill, sorry, Mr. Clerk, would you like to clarify the change that I think one is being removed and one is being added?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, the notice of motion to waive the rules of procedure is being withdrawn. The item number 9, notice of motion, the town support of the Association of Citizens Together in our Nasagawa is being moved over to the introduction of notice of motion. And at that time, we'll be dealing with a motion to refer the motion or the request back to staff for report.
Thank you. So this is just simply an introduction of a notice of motion for it, that it'll be referred back to staff on the May 27th council meeting and considered at that point. So I believe we don't need we don't need a mover or a seconder on it. It's just an introduction only, and the subject is town support for the Association of Citizens Together in Nasagawa, and we'll discuss that in our future meeting, not this one. Okay. Okay, I have now under items for consideration, the first notice of motion. Councillor Best's, seconded by Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. The motion is regards to the Paris Gulf Marine Conservation Act 2019. And I'm going to read it out. Be it resolved, whereas Regional Council at its March 27, 2019 meeting supported and endorsed the passage of Bill 71, the Paris Gulf Marine Conservation Act 2019. Therefore, be it resolved that Milton Council endorses and supports Halton Region resolution with respect to the passage of Bill 71, the Paris Gulf Marine Conservation Act 2019. Councillor Best, would you like to speak upon this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, on this. As councillors are aware, this was circulated from the region of Halton. Mayor Bennett and I raised it. It is a act going into the provincial legislature, and it's something that I support, that considering the concerns we have with the hidden quarry and other marine activities on the north end of Milton, and especially in Ward 1, that between Halton Hills and Milton, it's something that we should be supporting, and I'd hope that we have unanimous support.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, is there anything you wanted to add as seconder of the motion?
Not particularly, except to say that given the current climate, pardon the pun, of what's going on in our conservation areas, I think it's an important motion, and to show our support of what the region brought forward in Mayor Burnett's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. So seeing no more questions and comments on the motion, all those in favor? Carried? All those opposed? I should ask just in case. Okay, thank you. It's unanimous. Councillor Hamid's hand. So just to clarify, was that unanimous? I apologize.
It was unanimous. I just walked in. I didn't know which motion it was. I had to think about it. Sorry.
Thank you.
I supported the region.
Okay, moving down the list, the next notice of motion is from Councillor Chalner, seconded by Councillor Ali. The first one is, I believe, to waive the rules of procedure to permit this notice of motion consideration at this council meeting, I believe. So we need a vote on that. And the mover is Councillor Chalner and the seconder is Councillor Ali. All those in favor? Great, approved. So the motion is, be it resolved, whereas procedure bylaw 007 provides that notice of motions not be discussed or debated. Sorry, I'm reading it, we already approved it. Discussed or debated upon introduction, but shall be included in the next regional council meeting for consideration. This one I'm going to read. Okay, so this is the one we're considering now that we just changed the rules of procedure for. So, be it resolved, whereas Maplehurst Correctional Complex has been a significant community partner in Milton since its establishment in 1974, collaborating with the Town of Milton, area churches, and other organizations, principally through its community work program in a way that benefited both local residents and prison inmates. And whereas the community work program specifically afforded inmates purpose, pride, and rehabilitation through their good works in the community over most of the last 45 years. And whereas the community work program has been cancelled by the Government of Ontario, therefore, be it resolved that the Mayor, on behalf of Milton Council, be authorized to write to the Honourable Sylvia Jones, Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Government of Ontario, requesting that the community work program be reinstated. And finally, that the resolution be circulated to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Government of Ontario, Parm Gill, Member of Provincial Parliament, Milton, Government of Ontario, and Gary Carr, Chairman, Regional Municipality of Halton. Councillor Challoner, would you like to speak upon this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be really quick. I think it's fairly obvious. But the program has been of benefit to the community for almost 45 years. It was canceled briefly in the 1990s and was reinstated at the request of Milton Council. There has been some issue with respect to why it's been canceled, and I think that we need clarification from the Minister because I'm not sure that we actually know. I find it hard to believe that when you've got a prison population of 1,500 to 2,000, you can't find enough people in a 2 years less a day complex to participate in this program. And so I think the Minister owes the community a response. This community has been uniformly supportive of Maplehurst since its construction here. We were very positive about the addition that made it one of the largest prisons in Canada in the late 1990s. It was completed in the early 2000s. And so we're a good community partner. We want to see them continue to be a good community partner, and hopefully we'll get a response.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. I have a speakers list of Councillor Cluett and then Councillor Best. Councillor Ali, as seconder, is there anything you want to add first?
Just a short comment. This is pretty self-explanatory, but the presence of this program really helped Milton community. These people were involved in keeping our community clean and helping out and filling the gaps that were necessary. So I'm really happy to second this motion, and I would like to thank Councillor Challoner for giving me the opportunity to second this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Councillor Cluett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, I wholeheartedly support this. I had an opportunity to speak to one of the guards over at Maplehurst. He was doing some fundraising activities for the Halton Women's Place, and he had mentioned that this program had been, in his eyes, canceled by the province, and this is where we need to get the clarification as to if it was canceled or whatever the reasons are for it's not happening anymore. I can speak personal experience over at Knox Church across the street here. We had a number of these people in this correctional, in this program, take part in some work, landscaping work, some construction work. So it's not just cleaning up our roads, it's being part of and giving back to the community. And we had an opportunity, our church elders actually prepared a dinner for them. And we heard a lot of explanations. Mayor Krantz was there, actually, as I remember that now. And we heard some very emotional statements from these people about the impact that this program has on it. It's giving them a second life. And like Councillor Challoner mentioned, I can't imagine how out of the population of inmates that are there that there's not enough people to qualify for this. So I've seen it firsthand. We've seen it firsthand in this community as Milton continues to grow. So I won't belabor the point, but I think this is a program that's much needed, and hopefully we can get a quick response back from the Minister and the government.
Thank you, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Best, you also had some questions or comments?
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I commend Councillor Challoner for bringing this forward. As many councillors are aware, it's not only the town that's benefit, but a number of seniors. There was a program for almost 30 years of senior snow clearing, and I know a number of seniors benefited, and actually they were even willing to pay for the service because they actually came within 24 hours to clear out the ends of their driveways and the rest of it. Also, Conservation Halton. They have the brush gangs that did an extraordinary amount of work that you probably couldn't pay anybody else to do, as well as Councillor Cluett mentioned about the churches downtown Milton is still benefiting. Many of the trees you see in downtown were planted by Maplehurst residents, and some of them are still alive.
Thank you, Councillor Best. I see no other questions or comments. I will put it to the vote. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. The next one is again to waive the rules of procedures to permit the notion of motion consideration at this council meeting. The vote's going to be on us considering the motion for the resumption of Provincial Ontario Grant Program for Heritage Residential Commercial Building Restoration. So I have a mover of Councillor Challoner and a seconder of Councillor Best for us to waive the rules of procedures to permit this notion of motion to be considered today. All those in favor? All those opposed? Passed. And now the actual motion. So once again, it's resumption of Province of Ontario Grant Program for Heritage Residential and Commercial Building Restoration. Be it resolved, whereas the Ontario Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Support currently provides annual operating support to historical societies, museums, and other heritage associations that promote public awareness of Ontario's rich and diverse heritage through its Heritage Organization Development Grant. And whereas the Government of Ontario used to provide grants directly to owners who restored residential and commercial buildings that are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, therefore be it resolved that the Mayor, on behalf of Milton Council, be authorized to correspond with the Government of Ontario requesting that it give consideration to restoring its grant program for owners who restore residential and commercial buildings that are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. And finally, that this resolution be circulated for their review and response to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Government of Ontario, the Honourable Sylvia Jones, Minister of Tourism, Culture and Support, Government of Ontario, Parm Gill, Member of Provincial Parliament, Milton, Government of Ontario, and Gary Carr, Chairman, Regional Municipality of Halton. Councillor Challoner, would you like to speak upon this?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just very quickly, this was a discussion that Council had at the last Council meeting, and I indicated that I would bring something forward. It's a modest program that ran, and I think that's fine that it stay modest. Essentially, we had homeowners here with historic heritage homes that were receiving, $3,000 to replace a window, as an example, or replace a door that was historically sympathetic to the existing building. So it's not a big program, big dollars, but what it does do is it encourages people to consider restoring their historic homes or buildings. And again, not a lot of money, but I think the right message and will spur some into action. So I bring it to you for your consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. Councillor Best, would you like to add anything as a seconder?
No, Councillor Challoner's already highlighted everything.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments, I will put it to the vote. All those in favor? Passed. Okay, so again, we're going to vote on waiving rules of procedure to permit notice of motion consideration at council meeting. The one we want to waive this time is provincial cuts to flood forecasting and natural hazards management funding. All those in favor of considering that at this council, you have a question? No. All those in favor? Passed. Okay, again, I'm going to read out the motion. It's regards to provincial cuts to flood forecasting and natural hazards management funding, as I mentioned. Be it resolved, whereas the latest budget from the Ontario provincial government has cut Conservation Authority flood forecasting and natural hazards management funding by 50%, and whereas flooding and erosion in particular are natural hazard concerns in Milton, and whereas threats directly associated with flooding and erosion include property damage, personal injury, or loss of life, as well as impacts to water quality and the area's animals of plants, and whereas conservation authorities use this flooding to protect and reduce the risk of property damage and loss of life to flooding, and whereas these cuts would automatically download on the taxpayers and lead to higher property taxes. Therefore, it be resolved that the provincial government be called upon to not cut Conservation Authority flood forecasting and natural hazards management funding by 50%, and that the mayor write a letter to the premier to request that the province revisit their decision, and that Milton will work with the provincial government to find effective solutions to deal with this concern. And that a copy of the letter be sent to AMO, Rod Phillips, Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, Milton MPP Parm Gill, Milton MP the Honourable Lisa Raitt, Halton Regional Council, Conservation Halton, and the area municipalities. Councillor Ali, would you like to speak upon this motion?
Yes, very quickly. All the details are already there, but I would just like to point out that 38% of Milton is under Conservation Halton Authority Hazard Lands Regulation, and this 38% includes floodplains, valley lands, erosion, setbacks, etc. So all of the sustainable growth we have in Milton is from the help of programs like this. And if we do not have this program, if 50% of the funding is taken away from it, we will not be able to grow sustainably. And another factor I want to talk about is the direct impact on taxpayers. The direct impact of these cuts will be an increase in our levy to municipalities by 1.5%, and that is if we take the 50% of the funding away. If we take all of it away, that's going to be 3.5%. That's going to be 3%, and it's going to download directly on the taxpayers. And so, for that reason, I would like my council colleagues to support this.
Councillor Clute, as seconder, do you have any comments?
No, just say thanks for Councillor Ali for bringing this up. One of the things that we do at the region is approve the regional budget, and part of the regional budget is the Conservation Authority's budget. So we approve that, and that's put on the tax levy of the taxpayers. So looking at the potential impact on the regional tax base is very important. And you only have to look to communities just to the east of us in Bracebridge to see the impacts of what can happen if for flooding decisions. So these are things that we need here to keep in the Conservation Halton, especially here for Milton. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Clute. Your Worship, you had a question or a comment?
Probably, Mr. Chairman, probably more of a comment than anything else. I'm very supportive of the motion, but if I could go right to the last whereas, these cuts would automatically download on the taxpayers and lead to higher property taxes. I know it's a provincial mandated program for the most part, but I'm not so sure rather it would automatically, because at least as far as I'm concerned, we're still in control of our budget here, okay? So let's make it very clear that we, in our wisdom or the lack thereof, when we deal with our next year's budget, we said there's no darn way that we're going to include this. Then it's up to us to say to the province, you mandated this, you pay for it. That's where I'm digging in. If you say you pay. Don't say, and somebody else pay. That doesn't set with me.
I see two others, a first-time speaker, Councillor Challoner, and then Councillor Cluett.
Just if the mover and seconder wouldn't mind adding the Grand River Conservation Authority to those that it circulates?
Would you guys be, so would the mover and seconder be okay for that amendment?
Absolutely.
I'd consider it a friendly amendment if I'm getting a nod from the rest of council members. Mr. Clerk, did you catch the change that they would? Okay, I'm getting the nod. If there, oh, sorry, Councillor Cluett, you had a further comment or question.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to sort of clarify that I know what the mayor was talking about, but these are these cuts that are coming from the province for this funding is after all we've already set our budgets. And after already that the Conservation Authority has set their budgets. So that's where the cumulative impact is going to go. I understand you say you pay, and that's a great thing that we've been at the region and been talking to the province or asking the province to pay for what they've been saying for many, many years, and the shortfall continues. So I totally agree with you that if they're saying it, they have to pay, but these cuts now are going to affect either from a Conservation Authority point of view, budgets that have already been passed. So it's kind of hard to go backwards instead of going forward. So that's why I just want to make sure that we got that clarification there. It's that's the reason for the importance for this motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very familiar with that, and of course I'm looking forward to next year, not what has happened in the past.
So if there are no other questions or comments, I had a comment as well. Myself and Councillor Mead, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Cluett do sit on Conservation Halton, and we have recently heard from Conservation Halton, similar to what Councillor Cluett was saying, is the financial impact this would have as the budget's already been set. And this work is needed, it is important, it is a safety concern. Milton is on a floodplain. There are flood concerns in Milton as well as Halton region. So the defunding of this from the province does not mean that this work is not important and needs to still be carried out. And they're still mandating it to be carried out, but they're removing the funding from it. And that is a further burden on the property taxpayer. There's only one taxpayer, but if this is a provincial mandate, it should be part of the provincial funding, which it has been historically, and I'm surprised that they made this change without in my opinion, working with the municipalities. So I am in favor of this as well. So seeing no more hands up, I'll move it to the vote. All those in favor? Passed unanimously. Your Worship, we seem to be giving you a lot of work tonight. I see you writing a lot of letters going forward. Okay, going on to the next, another wave of, oh, that was taken out. That was removed. So now we're to bylaws. Wow, we're almost over. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just on the bylaws, that's what we'll be dealing with next. The item 9 will be moved to the introduction of notice of motion after bylaws. Under the bylaws, since we deferred Howland Green, I believe 43-2019 should be withdrawn at this time, the bylaw. If that's in agreement with the mover and seconder.
Noted. So we just have the 3 bylaws below. Would I read those out? Thank you. Okay. Moved by Councillor Best, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 044-219, 045-219, 046-219 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Any questions or comments? No? All of those in favor? Passed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also under the introduction of the notice of motion, there is a resolution prepared to refer the matter back for staff report.
Moved by Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, seconded by Councillor Best. Be resolved that the notice of motion dated May 6, 2019 for town support for the Association of Citizens Together in a Nassagaweya Action Milton be referred to staff for a public report on any issues related to the notice of motion, and the staff provide this public report to council at its May 27, 2019 meeting. Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, any comments that you'd like to add to this motion?
No, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I know most of you, all of you would be aware of the situation that this motion is referring to. After some reflection and speaking to some colleagues and residents, it was felt that a staff report would be beneficial to have before the matter was debated in public. So that's what we're going to debate on May 27th.
Councillor Best, anything you want to add?
Ditto.
Great. Mr. Mayor, a comment?
Yeah, a comment or a question too, Mr. Chairman. From what I gather, the group or organization is very supportive of what we're doing here and the reasons thereof, because this has all happened reasonably, quick, and I know that they were prepared to come here tonight and address it because of those circumstances that can't be alluded to because of the potential legalities evolving around. They're fully supportive and fully aware of the potential.
I see that as a question. Councillor Tessler-Dirksen, would you be able to respond?
Yes, I am. Yeah, Councillor Best and myself have been in fairly frequent consultation with members of the action group and other residents that are concerned, and they're in full agreement with deferring or moving the motion until after the staff report is available. There is some time sensitivity. As many of you know, there is no requirement for rezoning in this particular matter. It's simply the application for the excavation to begin. So this group could find themselves before the LPAT quasi OMB, whatever it is, as early as the fall.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, is that it? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Seeing no other hands up, I will call it to a vote. All those in favor? Oh. Sorry? So hold on. Sorry, clarification. Are we, if everyone be calm for a second, Mr. Clerk, are we having a vote?
You're not voting on the notice of motion. You're voting on the resolution to refer the issue to staff for report back on May 27th.
So there is a vote. I'm not notice of motion. The vote to report this back to council. All those in favor? Thank you. Passed. Okay, we're almost done. Regional Council updates. Councillor Best?
3 quick items. I put on the local councillor's desk the strategic plan the region is asking for public input for. You can respond online for anyone that didn't get a copy. Also, on behalf of the Hydro chairman, you got an invitation. I'd ask that all councillors please RSVP as soon as possible. The meeting's on the 15th. It's our annual board meeting that they're looking for input from the shareholder. And also there's a special AMO board meeting on May 23rd, which I'll be attending, dealing with the provincial challenges that municipalities are facing. So I'll be reporting back to council on that meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Best. Your Worship, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Cluett.
Just a quick thing, this coming May 15th, similar to what we do here at the town, we have information workshops with staff. We're going to be doing on the 15th an information workshop about drinking water. It's the once per term that we do, the drinking water supply, and some people from the AMO, Fred and Nigel, coming in for their presentation as well. So if anybody's interested, you can watch that online, or you can come down to Halton Region at 9:30 on May 15th.
Thank you, Councillor Cluett. Now I call for an adjournment. Done. Declare the meeting over.